Thanks for tuning into Talking Point. I'm your host, Neeraj Shah. The case for a chat today with our guest are three key points that we wanted to talk to him because he looks at longer-term trends very, very effectively. And of course, Capex remains center stage almost in every conversation that we've been doing off late. But let's bring up the case for a chat on the screen, and I'll tell you what the key point is. One, whether rural consumption comes back in 2024 due to stimulus or due to natural factors, and what are the things that therefore you should focus on with regards to that. We of course talk about Capex, which will drive maybe India growth higher versus other emerging markets. Could that happen? We'll talk to our guests about that. And of course, whether domestic capital is a big driver for future returns, or will Indian markets still need to depend largely on global flows as well. Our guest today is Mrinal Singh, CEO and CIO, InCred Asset Management. Mrinal, great having you. Thanks so much for taking the time out.
Pleasure is all ours. Thank you.
So Mrinal, actually, let me start with the last point first. Since 2018 or thereabouts, there's been this turn in local flows, which has far outstripped the impact, I presume, on global flows, or maybe I'm mistaken. But when I talk to global experts, they all talk about how while global flows will be a large impact episodically, the structural changes the local flows, and they will only improve and give the buffer. Are you of the same opinion?
So, well, the domestic flows, or let me call it the financializations of savings, is a trend which is here to stay. The numbers are testimony to it. We are roughly clocking, if I look at the mutual fund data, AMFI data, we're roughly clocking at 31 lakh crores of equity. It's substantially high from where it was 5 years ago, more than double. And the trend continues. But and they have become a force to reckon with in the marketplace. The domestic institutions far outpace foreign institutions on most days. And I'm not surprised. And we might have a situation where domestic will be the gorilla in the room going ahead, no doubt about it. But that, in my view, is not going to be the driver of returns. The driver of returns is going to be the profitability and the earnings.
Got it. Actually, yesterday, somebody made this interesting view. I think I was talking to, Ganesh Ram Jayaraman of Avendus Spark. He was making this point. I would love to understand how you think about it. He said FY24 or FY21 to 24, companies have been able to improve profitability because of factors which were in control of the company, largely, his view, of course. And he said, and his analysis of earnings for FY24 seemed to suggest that the top line growth will be circa 5%, bottom line growth could be 20%. So with all the stimulus, etc., all has happened, we're still looking at only 5% earnings growth or top line growth. And therefore, he believed that FY25, because of the challenges to revenue growth, as well as because factors that might drive margins and bottom lines might be external in nature, predictability of profit growth might be difficult and in very likely could come off relative to FY23 and 24. Any thoughts on this? What is it that your estimates suggest?
So we do this for a living, so I'll put my thoughts across. Let's talk about the current state. Clearly, the profit trajectory has been robust for corporate India, but it's in line with expectation. So there are no, aggregate level, there are no great surprises. Sectoral level, there are ups and downs, but at aggregate level, the earnings have more or less matched where the estimates were. On the revenue side, the top line side, quite a few sectors have benefited out of crude being higher. So it has translated into their finished good prices reflecting that. There is positive impact on profitability or margins because inflation had tended lower. China opened up in the last 12 to 18 months, so raw material prices actually eased out. So that has helped margins across industries. We've seen some sectors having natural growth. So net, even with interest rates having risen, we have seen the profitability matrix improving for aggregate level corporate India. Well, going ahead, clearly there are challenges on top line growth. In fact, profitability margins maintenance itself could be a tall task, but there are silver linings. If we do see rural India picking up, which is a very large segment of the domestic economy, if we do see demand picking up in the Western world, particularly both sides of Atlantic, And if we do see inflation remaining benign, things could look very, very different. Now, well, too much to ask, but then if we do take a horizon which is long enough, I think that is something that all three could play out. But will it play out in 25 or will it play out somewhere between 25 to 27? We don't know, but that's going to happen.
Okay. And do you believe that, I mean, what are the factors that could lead to a rural pickup, Mrinal? Would it have to be, let's say, loosely spoken, ahead of the election, fiscal spend by the government, etc., to do that? Or is there a cyclical revival likely to happen?
So, a very pertinent question, and I think from an economy perspective, the most important thing to watch out for. I think the most dominant thing that would drive rural to pick up in the next fisc is going to be the cyclical recovery. In rural, things have clearly bottomed out. We've seen the negative impact of COVID on household incomes in the rural areas go behind. And there is obviously going to be some bit of stimulus in the form of election pre-spending, which will kickstart things over there. In any case, India growth story is not about upgrade into consumer categories. It is actually about under-penetration and penetration increasing. So we are a nation or a society where almost 300 million households exist. And very few of them have, peripherals like a washing machine or a car or a two-wheeler or anything of that sort. So the India growth story is about that. And rural is going to be a very big driver. In the last 3 years, we've seen, you name the category, we've generally seen the highest ticket SKU showing volume growth ahead of the entry-level SKUs. That's just to reflect the rural stress maybe. And things obviously in the next 12 to 18 months will start showing a different trend. And when that happens, because the sheer volume that rural households bring to the table, I think a lot of Capex that has happened would get justified. And I think there would be urge and need for even more higher Capex.
Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna tackle that Capex question on the other side of the break, but I just want to focus a little bit more on this rural. And when I look at the sectoral allocation of one of the aspects, which is the emerging business fund, for example, right? I see interesting allocations, consumers as a large weight, auto ancillaries as a very large weight, auto and auto ancillary. Is this indicative of your optimism towards the rural recovery?
Well, the way we conduct our investing, we don't generally go about choosing sectors and overweight, underweights around it, but we obviously choose businesses. It's an outcome of that choice that we are seeing an underweight and overweight scenario, but then it does reflect our preferences. Clearly, consumer discretionary to a large part, auto and auto ancillary has been a preference in the last year or so for us. We do like consumers as a space, but for valuation largely. So we are very picky around that, and healthcare is a area that we are very, very gung-ho about. We think that's a long runway that people could or investors could consider investing into.
So you guys have a healthcare fund within the AMC as well, but in other funds as well, a 9.7% weightage on healthcare is a very large overweight relative to the index, I reckon. So therefore, are you kind of trying to time this as well, or is this a fund for all seasons, so to say, or let's say for the next 2-3 years, and therefore timing it is not necessarily as important?
Well, we don't try to time, but obviously we try to reflect our conviction with the valuation matrix. So if the valuation or the risk reward is very, very favorable, it will reflect upon the weights. As you mentioned, maybe index weight is 3, 4 or something on healthcare, but our allocation is closer to 10. But that's just a reflection of where we think the risk reward is. And to borrow the term that you use, all season fund.
All season fund. Okay. I want to dwell a bit, like I said, we'll do Capex on the other side. I want to understand, for example, and for the viewer who's listening into it right now, wants to understand why is it that InCred and Mrinal are so constructive on auto and auto ancillaries, despite the fact that the last 2-3 years, autos have actually given good returns. At some point of time, will it come off, or is this likely to continue? Part one of my question. Part two of my question, within this auto and auto ancillary, are ancillary as a bet a lot higher than what they would have been in the past? And how are you playing this? I mean, is it EVs? Is it two-wheelers? Is it four-wheelers? Is it, I mean, what have you? Just take your time and explain.
So excellent question, Neeraj. So let me talk about it now. We are going to see, in the last 10 years, we've seen largely Capex happening from the government, which is public infrastructure creation. The economy has more or less, I may use a harsh word, suffered out of lack of private capex for a variety of reasons which might be valid. But the reality is that the industrial manufacturing ecosystem in India, 40% of it is auto in one form and shape. And I'm including both four-wheeler and two-wheeler. So it's an ecosystem that's ready to jump. An electronic ecosystem or EMS ecosystem will take some time for activity to show up. We'll have to create the entire vendor matrix. We'll have to create supply chain solutions around it. But auto ancillary is world class over here. In fact, auto ancillary is ahead of auto. Now let's look at numbers. 300 million households. The car sales in India hover around 3 million. Just a 1% penetration. So are we done with auto sales penetration in India? The answer is no. Will it be EV or IC engine? Let's just keep that open. But are we done? No, not at all. So we see, give or take, some 25 million two-wheeler sales in India, both electric and IC included. But then, do we think that households in India have adequately done with their requirement for transport solutions? I think there is a long way to go. So auto does look promising. It's an ecosystem which is world-class over here, developed. It can feed into the global ecosystem as well. The valuations were attractive a year or so ago. And there are quite a few businesses in the auto ancillary system which actually are agnostic to it being EV or it being IC the future or anything else for that matter. For example, let's say tires or safety equipment or even bodies and things like those. So it makes no difference. Is it going to be EV will take or greener ways of mobility will take 5 years, 10 years or 15 years, but then these guys are going to exist. And we are seeing investments in that direction. Obviously, there are things that need to be tweaked. An electric vehicle is far heavier than a normal car. So we obviously have more wear and tear on supply side things, the transmission side things, and even tires, the safety equipment. So we keep talking about greener ways of mobility. What we tend to miss is, there are a lot of technological innovations happening. We are talking about automatic driven cars. We might actually, before the electric vehicles come, we might actually conquer and have driverless cars itself. Yeah. So a lot is happening over there, but then it still leaves space and scope for businesses to innovate, deliver products which will have demand for the future consumer behavior.
What fits within, and before we take that break, last question, what fits within this valuation, reasonable valuation in growth metric, or you're not, you're fine with maybe slightly higher valuation if the growth is there? And therefore, I'm just trying to understand what is it that you're choosing?
So we take two lenses over there. There are some businesses which are actually enabling the new technology or making it work. So although we do have in India a very robust auto ancillary ecosystem, but we do still lack things for the, let's say, a battery. An ecosystem for cell manufacturing still does not exist in a meaningful way. Then there needs to be an ECU control around it, things like those. So over there, such businesses, we take a approach where we try to see who have the right to win. Which are the managements, which are the businesses which are stepping in the right direction. And there are businesses which might be existing, like let's say a tire or let's say a body provider or safety equipment provider, where we kind of think that are they gearing themselves for the needs and the consumer demands of the future.
And so they are?
Yeah, so quite a few are.
Quite a few are. Yeah. Okay, get the drift. Cool. Thanks for this. Stay on, Mrinal. So much more to talk about. Slip into a quick break. Back with talking about Capex and the longer-term implications, investing implications because of the Capex push. with Talking Point in conversation with Mrinal Singh. We've discussed the possibility of the rise of the rural side and how to maybe one or two ways how to play that theme as well, at least the InCred view. Now, we focus on the InCred view on Capex. And I have this chart that we borrowed from the data, the India Ministry of Finance. And this shows how much India's fiscal expenditure on Capex has gone up. And if you can see, from circa 2020, there has been this large uptick that has happened in Capex from nearly 200 to 300, crores or whatever it's annually added. It's just zoomed up. Now, Mrinal, I would love to understand from you, what is the implication of something like this? There have been people who've gone out and said that while China was doing this and therefore had this head leap and India never did it, now that India is doing it, the comparisons of some infrastructure projects being comparable world class, and we've seen that in airports and some others, of course, but are not ruled out. And two, the longer term investing implications of something like this are also longer term in nature. I would love to understand how you think about this aspect, both from a country perspective and then from an investing perspective.
Make no mistake about it, the public infrastructure in India is now world class. Let me put some data again. Look at the NHAI site. If you look at the length of national highways in India, the density is now matching China. So we are lakhs of kilometers of national highways divided by the area we have, 3.2 million square kilometers, that matches China. So our highways are there. We've debottlenecked them. There is e-way, there is all kinds of things that we've done. We've got the DFCC more or less running. Dedicated freight corridor has actually expanded capacity by 6 times in the economic corridor from west to north. So there is a significant capacity that has been created. Our ports, which 15 years ago were not gold standard in terms of movement. So the port efficiency is measured by number of containers you can move in a minute. Rotterdam used to be gold standard. Shanghai used to do 22, 23. That was the gold standard in the world. We have multiple ports doing that now. 22, 23 containers per minute, we do that now. So we have got a public infrastructure. Courtesy a lot of government spending and priority. We roughly clock, if you look at the last union budget, and we are on the verge of a vote on account on this month end, we were talking about 100 billion of Capex. And this is one segment of the union budget that does get spent. So 100 billion of Capex, that is what roughly the union government meant, and it is double from last 3-4 years. We're not even taking states into account. A lot of states now actually are on the verge or already are revenue surplus. We have, if you look at state Capex budget, we're talking 12 lakh crores plus. That's a significant amount of money. Government is a very large Capex supplier. But the important point is government, be it state or center, spends on the public infrastructure creation. What has been missing is the private Capex. Now PLI is into picture. We might have, some things getting delayed, sometimes happening obviously faster. But with the credit growth data that we see now, I think private Capex is rising. You can debate and discuss the slope, but the reality is that private Capex or private sector Capex is rising. So we will see capacity creation. There are catalysts in the picture, like a PLI. We've got in the last 5 years policy frameworks getting favorable in terms of corporate tax being reduced. Now we have, if you're under PLI, you have 15% corporate tax. I mean, that's the least you get anywhere in the region. All competing economies, there's nothing better than that. So we've got all things in place. It's a matter of time. We will start seeing private Capex jumping up and the effects. The issue with Capex is obviously, there's a lag by which you start seeing the positive effect on the economy.
Right.
The good part is our consumption continues to be robust. We do expect the rural consumption to pick up, so it will only look better. And there is a lot of credit available for that, fueling the consumption as well as providing capital to businesses on the private side as well. So things look good, particularly on the macro side. The government continues its job of creating public infrastructure, the Capex that you mentioned. And if the private party does move in into significant way, we will obviously see a very significant follow-through impact on the overall economy.
How to invest on this theme now?
So, it becomes challenging. The market participants obviously are able to see through it. If we were talking a year ago, I would have said industrials, very, very promising. As we speak now, industrials, I think, have run a little ahead of time. So, but then can we do it through a cement? Can we do it through corporate banks? Can we do it through utilities, consumables, power utilities? I mean, there are ways, obviously. That choice is largely dependent, the bottom-up choice is largely dependent upon how the valuation of the risk-reward presents itself, what is the kind of growth and the business and the management that is placed into the system. So, well, are there choices? Not as easy as a year ago were there, but then do we think that the runway is long and strong? The answer is yes.
So therefore, my question, just to simplify this, I don't want you to take names, but I'm using them as an example for people to understand. Industrials, so the ABBs, L&Ts, Siemens, Cummins, etc. They've run up. Some of them might be expensive, but you are saying that in a multi-year cycle, maybe they will do well. But there are other ways to play this Capex theme as well. The industrials may be the most popular, but power utilities, power financiers, etc. might still be ways to play them.
Yes, one of them, cement is also a very strong case. I would say cement plays into infrastructure, it plays into housing, it plays into rural consumption, it plays into everything.
Okay. And in cement, would you choose pan-India or would you be comfortable choosing regional players as well? Would the rising tide lift all boats?
Well, interesting question. Cement is a commodity which is regional in nature. It does matter if you choose a regional one, but in the right region. You choose a regional one, but in the wrong region might not.
So what's the right region? Is South the right region? Is North the right region?
Clearly, I think North and East are the right regions.
From a cement perspective, North and East are the right regions.
At least from our analysis, they seem to be more promising.
Okay. And last question. So cement, power utilities are ways. Is there something else? And because it's such a wide bucket.
Lenders.
And lenders of the private side or?
Private bank, corporate banks, home mortgage lenders. We have never seen economic growth in India and housing growth not being together. It just doesn't happen.
Got it.
I mean, by far the largest formal employer in this nation is housing. So there is all kinds of policy incentive to keep that ticking and make it move up. So housing is going to be part of the growth. By that I mean volumes. I am not necessarily trying to comment on prices. I'm not an expert on that. But and it's a secure lending business. I think that's a great place to be.
Great. And Mrinal, it's a great place to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time out and being with us on Talking Point. And look forward to have you more often.
Thank you. Pleasure is all ours. Thank you.
The pleasure was ours. Viewers, thanks for tuning in.